17 species watched the scan results and said nothing useful. The object drifting toward docking ring 4 was not a ship. It was not a weapon. It was not any registered piece of equipment in the Conclave's vast database. It was roughly cylindrical, badly burned on one side, and it was breathing. The bioscan made that very clear. Something inside that pod had a heartbeat. Something with a body temperature of 49 degrees and lungs the size of storage crates. The station duty officer, a tall insectoid yokai named Bress, looked at the scan and made a decision in under 4 seconds. He flagged it Category Fauna, authorized a quarantine bay, and sent a maintenance crew to bring the pod in with cargo clamps. He did not send a medic. He sent a hazmat team. Dara Osei heard about it third hand, through the station's shared research channel, where someone had uploaded a blurry screenshot of the bioscan with the caption, "Something alive in the debris field. Big." She was halfway through her lunch. She put it down and went to find Bress. He told her it was handled. She told him she was a xenobiologist and would like to observe. He told her fauna recovery was not a research event. She told him she would stand outside the quarantine bay and look through the window, which was technically not against any regulation. He looked at her for a moment with his compound eyes, decided she was not worth the argument, and walked away. The pod sat in quarantine bay 9. The hazmat team had cut it open from the outside, confirmed the interior was pressurized with something close to oxygen, and then found reasons to stand very far back. Dara pressed her face to the observation window. The creature inside was curled into itself like a sleeping cat, except it was the size of a large cargo trolley and covered in scales the color of old gold fading to cream at the belly. Its wings were folded so tight they looked like a second skin. Its tail wrapped around its own body twice. It was, without question, a dragon. Not a creature that looked like a dragon. An actual dragon. Dara had seen the Conclave's xenological records. She had read the 3 contested papers on whether dragon sightings in the outer systems were real or sensor ghosts. They were real. The dragon was not moving. Its chest rose and fell with slow, heavy breaths. One of the hazmat crew tapped the pod casing with a tool, testing. The dragon's eye opened. Just one. It was the color of amber, and it was not the eye of an animal. It moved with purpose. It found the hazmat crew member. It looked at him for a long moment. Then it closed again. The hazmat crew requested immediate backup. Dara requested access to the bay. She was told no. She asked again with different words. She was told the creature was Category Fauna and active handling required a licensed fauna crew. She said she was willing to sign a liability waiver. They said there was no waiver form for dragons. She said she would wait. She waited for 4 hours. The fauna crew, it turned out, was occupied with a containment issue on the agricultural deck involving something with 8 legs and strong opinions. The hazmat team eventually left because their suits were getting uncomfortable. The duty officer forgot to post a replacement watch. Dara found the bay door unlocked at hour 5 because the maintenance system had recycled the lock code and no one had reset it. She walked in. The bay smelled like hot metal and something older, like a forest after a storm, if the forest were very large and very far away. The dragon did not move when Dara entered. It kept its eyes closed, but its nostrils widened slightly. It was smelling her. Dara stood still. She had spent 6 years working with creatures that did not speak any language she knew. She understood one rule above all others. Do not be loud. Do not be fast. And do not pretend you are not afraid when you are, because most animals can smell the difference. She was afraid. She was also fascinated in a way that pushed the fear to the side. She sat down on the floor, cross-legged, 3 meters from the dragon. She said nothing. She did nothing. She just sat. A minute passed. Then 2. The dragon opened both eyes. It looked at her the way she was looking at it. Carefully, without aggression, with something that felt, if she was being honest, like the same kind of careful curiosity she was feeling. It lifted its head. The neck was long, and it moved with an odd, slow grace. The amber eyes tracked her face. Then they moved to her hands, open on her knees. Then back to her face. Dara exhaled slowly. "Hello," she said. Not loudly. Not with the careful enunciation people use for things they assume cannot understand them. Just normally. The way she would say it to anyone. The dragon's head tilted. A small tilt, barely a degree. Its gaze dropped to her mouth, then came back up to her eyes. It did not speak. It did not move toward her. But from deep in its chest, very softly, came a breath. A long, warm exhale that carried no fire, no threat. Just air. Just acknowledgement. Like the word hello had landed somewhere, and something had received it. Dara sat in the quarantine bay for another 2 hours. When she finally left, she filed a research access request, a reclassification query, and a care assignment form listing herself as the responsible party. She did not go home. She sat in the corridor outside Bay 9 and read everything the Conclave's database had on dragons, which was very little, and decided she would need to learn a great deal more. Inside the bay, the dragon curled tighter and closed her eyes. But she had moved, just slightly, 2 inches closer to where Dara had been sitting. Nobody gave Dara permission to name her. She did it anyway. The care assignment form had a field for subject designation. The Conclave system auto-generated a code. Fauna unclassified 7741. Dara typed Suri in the box instead. The system accepted it without complaint. Forms rarely argue. By the 3rd day, Suri was eating. Not enthusiastically, and not anything Dara offered her directly, but the portions left in the feeding area were gone each morning. By the 5th day, Suri had stopped keeping her wings pressed flat against her body. By the 7th, she had moved her sleeping spot from the far corner of the bay to roughly the middle of the room, which put her about 4 meters closer to the door where Dara came in. Dara noticed all of this. She did not make a big deal of it. She came every day, twice. Morning and evening. She sat on the floor. She talked in a low, even voice about whatever was in her head, her research notes, the political noise coming from the conclave chambers, what she had eaten for lunch, a bird she remembered from when she was 9 years old in Accra. She did not expect Suri to understand any of it. She just did not want silence to be the thing between them. Suri listened. Her amber eyes followed Dara's mouth with a focused attention that was, frankly, unsettling in its precision. On the 11th day, Dara brought a maintenance drone in to check the bay's ventilation filters. The drone moved fast and loud, and it bumped Suri's tail on its way past. Suri went rigid. Her scales rose slightly. Her chest swelled. Dara said, "Stop." Flat and clear. She said it to the drone's operator through the comm, and the drone halted. Suri looked at Dara, then at the drone, then at Dara again. That was the first time. The second time was a week later. A conclave scientist named Orav came to the bay with a blood sampling kit. He had filed paperwork. He had clearance. He walked in with the kit extended and moved straight towards Suri with the energy of someone who considered fauna collection a minor task. Suri shifted back, her eyes narrowing, her wings beginning to spread. Dara stepped between them. She looked at Orav. She said, "Stop." Orav stopped. He looked irritated. He said he had authorization. Dara said the authorization covered entry, not contact, and that he was welcome to file a separate contact request which she would then review as the assigned caretaker. Orav left. He was unhappy about it. Dara did not particularly mind. Suri had watched the whole thing. Her wings folded back. Her eyes stayed on Dara. After that, Dara started teaching deliberately. She would hold up her hand, palm out, and say the word. Then she would bring the hand down. Then she would do it again. She used it for real things, pausing her own movement when she caught herself crossing the space too fast, stopping the food delivery arm from swinging too close. She let Suri watch the word work. Let her see that it meant something specific, that it was not just sound. It was cause. Suri watched. She tilted her head. She watched Dara's mouth shape the word over and over. Dara never pushed. She never pointed at Suri and waited. The lesson was never say this. It was only ever here is a thing that is real and here is the word that holds it. On the 21st day, Dara came in the evening and found Suri already awake, sitting upright, watching the door. When Dara sat down, Suri shifted her weight and made a sound. A quiet one. Dara looked up. The sound had a shape to it, like a word with its edges still rough. The consonant was wrong. The vowel was slightly too long. But the intent was there, clear as anything. It was an attempt. Dara felt something crack open in her chest. She held very still. She said the word once, slowly. Suri listened. Her jaw moved. Her throat worked. The sound came again. Closer this time. Not perfect. Not even close to perfect. But unmistakably aiming at the right target. Dara did not praise her loudly. She did not clap or perform excitement. She just looked at Suri and nodded, Once, slowly. The way you nod at someone who has just shown you something true. She did not know, that night, what was building in the conclave's outer chambers. She did not know that a yokai cargo complaint had been formally upgraded to a species conduct charge. She did not know that Admiral Bren had been served notice that morning, or that Counselor Vin had already spoken to 3 other block leaders and counted enough votes. She did not know that a tribunal date had been set for 11 days from now, and that the charge, deliberate cultural aggression, carried, if upheld, the penalty of full human expulsion from the conclave. She did not know any of it yet. She was sitting on the floor of a quarantine bay, listening to a baby dragon practice the shape of a word in the dark, and thinking that this was the most important thing she had ever been part of. In that, at least, she was not wrong. She left late. She always did. She paused at the door, as she always did, and said good night to a creature that could not answer. She walked out into the corridor. Behind her, in the dark, Suri made the sound again. Alone this time. Quiet and careful, and trying to get it right. Nobody heard it but the walls. The conclave's tribunal chamber was built to make you feel small. That was not an accident. The tiered seating rose in a wide circle, every level higher than the last, so that the representatives of 17 species could look down at whoever stood in the center. The floor there was pale and open, ringed by a single carved line that marked the boundary of the accused position. There were no chairs inside that line. You stood. That was the design. Admiral Bren stood inside the line and looked straight ahead. He was not a small man. He had spent 30 years in human fleet service and another 4 as the senior human representative to the conclave. He had negotiated trade routes, settled boundary disputes, and once talked a station commander out of firing on a human research vessel through 4 hours of extremely patient conversation. He was good at patience. He used it now. Counselor Vin sat at the upper tier with the yokai delegation. He was thin and multi-limbed in the way of his species, and he held himself with the easy stillness of someone who had already decided how the day would end. He had been building this case for 8 months. He had the votes. He had the translated cargo records. He had witnesses. General Todd, the presiding officer, was not yokai. He was Drevathi, a species known for running tribunals efficiently and without obvious bias, which was exactly why they were given the job. He opened the session with a recitation of charges. The translator standing behind Bren was a conclave-appointed official named Was. He was technically certified. His conclave standard was excellent. His human language comprehension was, as Bren would discover, significantly less excellent. Todd read the primary charge. Was translated it into human speech for Bren's record as willful and intentional act of cultural hostility in commerce. What the charge actually said was miscommunication resulting in commercial offense. These were not the same thing. In conclave law, one was a clerical matter. The other was grounds for species-wide sanction. Roe sat 3 tiers up in the translator's gallery, not assigned to this session, not technically there for any official reason. He was young for a yokai, still training, and he had requested observer access on the grounds of professional development. He had his own earpiece. He was listening to both the chamber standard and Was's human language output at the same time. He noticed the mistranslation in the first 2 minutes. He looked at his hands. Bren began his response. He spoke carefully, in the measured way of someone who knows they are being recorded. He acknowledged that the cargo incident had caused a dispute. He explained that the human captain had followed the agreed manifest, and that the shortfall had been a measurement unit error, a known compatibility problem between human and yokai cargo systems that both sides had flagged as unresolved 3 years prior. He said the word miscommunication 4 times. Was translated it as error committed by the human party each time. Dara was not in the chamber. She had tried. Her observer request had been denied on the basis that she was not listed as a conclave representative for the human delegation. She had then tried to reach Bren's aide to flag the translation issue she suspected based on Vin's body language during the pre-session briefing she had watched on the public feed. The aide was unreachable. The feed was audio only. She sat outside the chamber on a bench in the outer corridor and watched the public display, which showed camera angles and conclave standard text, but no human language translation. She spoke enough conclave standard to read slowly. She read slowly. Inside, Todd asked Bryn to confirm whether the human captain had been informed of the yokai system of cargo measurement before the shipment. Was translated this reasonably well. Bryn said the captain had received the standard manifest template, which did not include the measurement system specification. Was translated Bryn's answer as, the captain was not informed because the information was not considered important. Ro closed his eyes briefly. The chamber was very quiet when Todd spoke again. He did not raise his voice. He simply said that based on the testimony presented, the tribunal would proceed to deliberation. He noted that the charge carried a recommended sanction of Class 3, which meant all human vessels currently docked at the conclave would be held pending review, human trade access would be suspended, and the delegation's presence on the station would be re-evaluated within 90 days. Class 3 had not been issued against any species in 40 years. Bryn stood very still inside the pale line on the floor. His face did not change. He had the look of a man calculating the exact dimensions of a problem he cannot solve. Outside in the corridor, Dara read the conclave's standard display slowly and felt her stomach turn. She pulled up the human legal channel and filed a formal objection citing translation inaccuracy. The system timestamped it. A response came back in under 4 minutes. Objection noted, but the filing party had no recognized standing in the current tribunal. Objection could not be entered into the record. Todd announced the final session would convene the following morning at the 6th hour. Sentence to be delivered immediately after deliberation. Bryn was escorted out by conclave security, not under arrest, just guided firmly, the way you guide someone who is no longer welcome to make decisions about where they walk. Rose sat in the observer gallery for a long time after the chamber emptied. He had 7 separate regulations open on his personal screen. He was looking for one that allowed a junior translator with no official role in a proceeding to submit a translation correction. He did not find one. He sat there anyway, thinking. 3 decks below, Suri pressed her nose against the quarantine bay door and breathed in the corridor air. Something was different about the station tonight. She did not have a word for what she was sensing, but she was very still, and her amber eyes were very bright, and she did not sleep for a long time. The lock on Quarantine Bay 9 recycled at the 3rd hour. It happened once every 7 days, a maintenance reset built into the station's automated systems. For 6 previous resets, the bay had relocked itself within 30 seconds. On the 7th reset, it did not, because the duty officer who was supposed to confirm the relock had been pulled to handle a pressure seal issue 2 decks up and had not come back. Whether Suri understood the mechanism or simply pressed against the door at the right moment, that question would be debated for a long time afterward and never cleanly answered. The door opened. Suri stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked into the corridor. The corridor was empty and softly lit at the low night cycle setting. She had never been in it before. She stepped out. She did not move fast. That was the first thing that surprised the security officer who caught her on a corridor camera 6 minutes later. He expected an escape, panicked movement, knocking into walls, a direct run for the outer docking ring the way most fauna breaks went. Instead, he saw a creature about the size of a large vehicle walking with slow, deliberate steps down the center of the corridor, her nose low, moving it slightly from side to side. She was following a scent. The officer hit the containment alert. Alarms sounded in the fauna response team channel, the security channel, and the duty officer channel. None of them reached Dara, who was not on any of those channels. She was sitting on the bench outside the tribunal hall on the mid-ring level, leaning against the wall, eyes closed but not sleeping, her coat pulled around her because the corridor was cold. She had not gone back to her quarters. She could not explain exactly why. The bench was uncomfortable and the corridor was quiet, and the tribunal hall doors were 10 meters away, and she kept thinking about Bryn's face on the camera feed before they walked him out. That empty, calculating look. She heard something in the corridor before she saw it. Not an alarm, not security boots. Something else. A soft, rhythmic sound, like large footsteps being placed very carefully on a metal floor. She opened her eyes. Suri came around the curve of the corridor with her nose still working and her amber eyes scanning, and the moment she saw Dara she stopped. Completely still. Her tail swung once. Then she walked forward. Dara did not move. She did not speak. She was aware that her heart was doing something extremely fast and loud. and she was also aware that Suri was crossing the distance between them with the specific directness of a creature who had been trying to find something and has now found it. Suri pushed her head against Dara's shoulder. Not gently, exactly. The force of it nearly knocked Dara off the bench. The scales were warm, and the breath coming from her nostrils was the temperature of a heater running on high, and the weight of that enormous head was significant. Dara put her arm around the side of Suri's jaw. She did not think about it. She just did it. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Suri rumbled, low and deep, the way old machinery sounds when it is doing exactly what it was built to do. They stayed like that. Dara on the bench, Suri's head on her shoulder, both of them looking at the tribunal hall doors. The security team arrived 3 minutes later. 4 of them, with containment poles and a portable barrier unit designed for fauna incidents. They came around the corridor corner at a fast walk and stopped when they saw what they were dealing with. Suri's head came up slowly off Dara's shoulder. She turned to look at the security team. Her scales rose slightly. Her eyes moved across all 4 of them in one slow sweep. The team did not advance. Dara stood up. She moved to put herself between Suri and the team, which was, in a purely physical sense, not very effective, because Suri was considerably larger than she was. But she did it anyway. She looked at the team. She said, "Stop." The word landed in the corridor. Behind her, Suri's head came up sharply. She had heard that word 100 times over 3 weeks. She knew its shape. She knew its weight. She knew, with the precise certainty of a creature who has been paying close attention, what it meant when the person she trusted said it. The security team had stopped, but not because of Dara. They had stopped because none of them had been trained for this specific situation, and their training protocols, in the absence of applicable guidance, defaulted to do not escalate. Ro was passing through the hall level on his way back from the translator archive. He saw the group from the far end of the corridor. He stopped walking. He watched Dara standing in front of a dragon with her arms slightly out, and the security team standing very still, and Suri with her eyes tracking every person in the space. Above them, 2 levels up, Counselor Vin received a security alert on his own device. He read it. His compound eyes were still for a moment. Then he made 2 calls. The first was to General Todd. The second was to the chamber scheduling coordinator. The final session would not wait for morning. It would begin now, before the corridor situation could be documented, discussed, or used. Before anyone could think too carefully about what it meant that a creature labeled fauna had walked, alone and deliberately, across a station to find a specific person and sit beside her outside a specific door. The chamber doors opened. Lights spilled into the corridor. Guards appeared and gestured for Bren to be brought. Suri looked at the open doors. She looked at Dara. Her amber eyes were very bright and very steady and watching everything. She stood up. The doors were open. That was the fact nobody could argue away afterward. The doors to the tribunal chamber were open because the session had been called early and the chamber staff had not yet cleared the corridor. No regulation barred entry through an open door. The conclave's legal architecture had simply never needed to account for what would walk through one. Suri walked in. She did not charge. She did not roar. She moved at the same slow, deliberate pace she had used in the corridor, the careful walk of a creature that is aware it is large and is choosing, deliberately, not to use that largeness as a threat. Her claws clicked on the pale floor with each step, a soft, rhythmic sound that carried easily through the silent chamber. 17 species watched from the tiered seats. Dara reached the doorway 3 seconds behind her. She stood at the threshold. She had not been cleared for entry. She stepped in anyway. General Todd was already at the presiding platform. He had been mid-sentence, calling the session to order for the record, when the door movement caught the attention of every person in the room. He stopped speaking. He looked at Suri. Admiral Bren had just been walked to the center floor. He stood inside the pale carved line, and he turned when the sound reached him, and he went absolutely still in the way of someone who has made peace with one kind of terrible outcome and has just been handed a completely different situation they do not yet have words for. Suri crossed the chamber floor. She moved past Bren, who did not move, and she stopped at the center of the circle, the accused position, the place where you stood to be judged. She stood there. The chamber held its silence the way a held breath is held, not comfortably, with effort. Counselor Vin recovered first. He leaned toward his delegate beside him and said, in conclave standard, clearly enough to be picked up by the chamber's recording system, "It is an animal. Remove it." Todd raised his hand toward the containment team stationed at the chamber's side entrance. For figures in station security gear began moving down the aisle toward the floor. Suri watched them come. Her chest expanded. Her scales rose along her spine, not from aggression, but the way any living thing rises to meet a pressure it has decided to meet. Todd's hand came down, the signal for the team to move in. Suri opened her mouth. What came out was not fire. It was not a roar. It was not the sound a creature makes when it is afraid or angry. It was a single word, shaped over 3 weeks of practice in the dark of a quarantine bay, roughed into form by a jaw and throat built for an entirely different kind of sound, offered now into a chamber where 18 species sat in stunned silence, and the recording systems were running, and everything was being logged into permanent conclave record. Stop. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The chamber had perfect acoustics, and everyone in it was already completely silent. The word landed. The security team stopped. Not because of a hand signal. Not because of a regulation. They stopped because there are things a trained professional can be prepared for and things they simply cannot be. And a creature that was filed as Fauna Unclassified 7741 speaking a clear, correctly used word in human language with recognizable intent was emphatically in the second category. Bren heard it. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved from Suri to Dara in the doorway and then back to Suri, and something in his face shifted, not relief, not yet, but the look of a man who is updating his understanding of the situation very quickly. Vin's voice came again, louder this time, with an edge underneath it. It is mimicry. Trained response. This is a disruption, not. Suri looked at him. Just that. She turned her head toward the sound of his voice, and she looked at him with her amber eyes, and she did not speak again. Vin stopped talking. Later, when people described this moment, they used different words for what happened in that look. The Drevithi journalist who had observer access called it recognition asserting itself against category. Rowe, in his formal testimony, said simply that the look made clear the creature understood what was being said about it and had decided to answer. Admiral Bren, in his personal log that night, wrote 4 words, "She was not scared." Dara stood in the doorway with her hands pressed flat against her thighs and her eyes burning in a way she was not going to examine right now. General Todd was a careful man. He had run 23 tribunals in his career, and he had seen, across those years, almost every way proceedings could be disrupted, delayed, or derailed. He had never seen this. He did not have a protocol for this. He had, however, a very clear understanding of conclave law's most foundational principle, the one that sat above every species statute and trade regulation and diplomatic convention, the one the whole structure was built on. All recognized sentient parties have standing to be heard. If the creature on the floor was sentient, the preceding session was invalid. If the classification was wrong, the charge was built on a compromised foundation. If the word was not mimicry, if it was intent, then everything needed to stop. He brought his hand down again, not toward the security team this time. Palm flat, facing the floor. The universal Drevithi signal used in chambers when a proceeding needed to be suspended. "Recess," he said. His voice was steady. It was the voice of someone who has decided that the most important thing he can do right now is stay calm and let the facts of the next few hours be what they are. The chamber erupted. Dara walked to Suri. She put her hand on the side of Suri's jaw, the same way she had in the corridor. Suri leaned into it slightly, the way she always did, and her scales settled slowly back down. Around them, 17 species were talking at once. Rowe was on his feet in the gallery. Bren had not moved from the circle, but his face had changed entirely, the calculation gone, replaced with something that looked like a man seeing the answer to an equation he had given up on. Vin said something to his delegation that the recording system caught, but the translation would be disputed for months. And Suri stood in the center of the chamber floor, gold and ivory under the tribunal lights, unhurried and still, 1 word spent, and 1 argument made, and 18 species left to figure out what came next. The recess became 3 days. It did not feel like 3 days to Dara. It felt like a long, strange dream she was living inside, where important things were happening in rooms she was not allowed into. And the most important thing was happening in a conference room on the station's lower ring, where she and Suri were waiting. The room had bad lighting, a water dispenser that made a clicking noise every 4 minutes, and a table with chairs Suri was not interested in. Suri slept on the floor, mostly. When she was awake, she pressed her nose to the door seam and breathed deeply, monitoring the corridor the way she monitored everything. Quietly, thoroughly, with those amber eyes moving across each detail, as if filing it for later. Dara read reports on her tablet. She ate food she did not taste. She read the same paragraph 12 times. On the first day, Ro gave his corrected testimony. He had spent the previous night working through conclave regulations with the focus of someone who had made a decision and was building the bridge to cross it. He found what he needed in subclause 14 of the Interpreter Conduct Standards. A certified translator in possession of material evidence of mistranslation in an active proceeding was required to submit a correction, regardless of their assigned role in that proceeding. It was a rarely used clause. It was exactly what he needed. He stood before Todd and the reduced session panel and delivered a line-by-line correction of Wass's translation. He did it without drama. He read from his time-stamped recording, compared each phrase, and noted the divergence. His voice was even throughout. It was, Todd said later in his personal record, the bravest thing he had witnessed in a tribunal chamber in a long career. The translation record fell apart under scrutiny. The phrase, miscommunication resulting in commercial offense, had been rendered 6 times in the human language transcript as something materially different. The cargo manifest issue, examined without that distortion, showed exactly what Brin had claimed, a known and unresolved technical incompatibility between 2 species measurement systems. A systems problem, not a conduct violation, certainly not cultural aggression. By the end of the second day, 3 junior counselors from the Yolkai block had filed formal statements distancing themselves from Vin's position. By the third morning, 2 more had followed. Vin himself was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a structure has started to come apart and its architect knows it. The charge was withdrawn. Brin heard it in the chamber with his hands folded behind his back and his face doing absolutely nothing. He nodded once. He walked out. In the corridor, he stopped and stood still for a long moment, and then he found a wall to lean against and breathed. He went to the conference room. Dara was standing when he came in. Suri was awake and watching the door with the focused attention she gave to new people. She did not growl. She tilted her head. Brin looked at Suri for a long moment. Then he looked at Dara. "I didn't know she could do that," he said. "Neither did I," Dara said. He nodded. He looked at Suri again. Suri looked back at him with those even amber eyes, and something in Brin's face shifted in a way it rarely did, towards something quieter and less armored. He left without saying anything else. Sometimes there is nothing else to say. The reclassification took longer than the trial had. The Conclave's classification board met 4 times across 2 weeks. They brought in linguists, behavioral specialists, and 3 separate academics who had written papers on sapience criteria. Suri attended 2 of the sessions, which she approached with the same calm attention she brought to everything, and at one point, unprompted, corrected her own name when a board member mispronounced it. The board noted this in the record. The final reclassification was read into the record on a quiet afternoon by a clerk with a flat voice and a fast delivery. Fauna Unclassified 7741 was reclassified as a recognized sentient individual under conclave law, pending full species review. All prior category fauna designations for dragon kind would be suspended pending that review. Suri was asleep on Dara's feet during the reading. She did not wake up. Vin was quietly reassigned to a trade oversight role on an outer monitoring station. The conclave preferred not to punish publicly when it could manage the same outcome through reassignment. Wass had his certification suspended pending a competency review, which was at least honest. 11 days after the reclassification, the station shuddered. It was a single, deep vibration, the kind that came through the floor before it came through the air, and it made every loose object on every desk in the station rattle in the same instant. Dara looked up from her desk. Her comm showed an unscheduled vessel in the outer approach lane. The vessel was not filing standard identification codes. It was broadcasting an old signal, a very old signal, in a frequency the conclave's modern systems had flagged as dormant. Dragonkind used that frequency. The records said so. The records also said no signal on that frequency had been received in over 200 years. The vessel was larger than a frigate. Dara went to the docking bay. She did not know why. She just went. Nobody stopped her. The station was busy not knowing what to do about the ship, and in the middle of that confusion, a single human xenobiologist walking purposefully toward the bay drew no attention. She stood at the bay window when the ship docked. The figure that came through the airlock was enormous. Ancient. Gold and deep amber scales that had gone thick and layered with age. A build that made Suri look like a first draft of the concept. Eyes that had the amber color but darker, like amber with something old moving behind it. Elder Suresh. He looked at the bay. He looked at Dara. She realized, very small. He spoke. It was Old Dragon, a sound like stone moving slowly against stone, like deep water, like something at the bottom of the world. Dara understood none of it. Behind her, small footsteps crossed the bay. Suri had followed her. Of course she had. Suresh looked at Suri. He spoke again, shorter this time. The rumble of it moved through the floor. Suri was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Dara. Her jaw moved. Her throat worked. She was doing the thing she always did before she tried. Gathering herself, finding the shape of it. She says, Suri began, haltingly, in conclave standard, the second language she had been working on without anyone formally teaching her. You are? A pause. A breath. Good teacher. Dara sat down on the docking bay floor. Not because she was hurt. Not because she was tired. She sat down because her legs had simply stopped being reliable and the floor was there. She put her hands over her mouth and she looked at Suri, who was watching her with those amber eyes, patient as she always was, and she felt something move through her that she did not have a word for in any language. Suresh made a sound that was possibly amusement. It was hard to tell with a creature whose facial range was built for an entirely different kind of expression, but the quality of it was warm. Suri walked over and sat beside Dara on the docking bay floor. She pushed her head against Dara's shoulder. Too big for it. Far too big, but she did it anyway, the same way she always had. Outside the bay, 18 species were rewriting law. In the docking bay, a human sat on the floor with a young dragon's head on her shoulder, and the oldest living dragon in known space watched them both, and nobody said anything else for a while, because nothing else needed to be said.